Well, greetings once again from Cooperstown, New York, side of the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. We continue with our virtual programs from here at the museum. Very glad to be with you. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Bruce Markison. Today it's our virtual author series. As always, this and our other virtual programs brought to you through the generous support of the Ford Motor Company. Really looking forward to our conversation today as part of our author series. Two gentlemen joining us, former Major League standout Dave Parker and his co-author Dave Jordan. They have combined to write a terrific book, Cobra, A Life of Baseball and Brotherhood. Guys, we welcome you both to the program. Thanks very much for taking some time to talk to us this spring. How you doing?
Doing well.
Bruce, thanks for having us here.
Yes, this is the first time I've had a chance to talk to Dave Parker. Dave Jordan's an old friend. He did a author series event live in our bullpen theater with John D'Acquisto, Fastball John, a few years back. So this will be our second conversation with Dave Jordan. By the way, that picture of Dave on the right side of your screen is actually from the bullpen theater when we had him here a few years back. You can see the cover of the book as well. And we want to mention some of the available outlets for this book. You can find it at Amazon.com. You can find it at the Nebraska Press website. That's nebraskapress.unl.edu, or you can find it at barnesandnoble.com. So those are three of the main outlets, although it is available in other places. If you're thinking that this is going to be a quick read, well, if you're a fast reader, I guess it would be, but it's a thick book. I mean, it is not a 150 pager. It's about 400 pages or so. It's thick. There's a lot of material there, but it does move quickly because of the storytelling, and there is a lot of interesting information. Just want to run down quickly some of Dave Parker's numbers. Played 19 seasons in the big leagues, batted .290, 339 home runs, a two-time batting champion, twice led the league in slugging percentage, 6 Gold Glove awards, and a 3-time All-Star. A terrific career. Let's begin with Dave Parker. Dave, why did you decide to write the book at this particular time in your life? Why is the timing right for you now?
Well, I always wanted to write a book, and it took about 20 years to get it done. And I figured, I won't have a chance again to do this. And I figured I had a lot to say through my relationships with players and young players. So it gave me an opportunity to do all those things in one.
You were telling me before we started the program that Dave was about the third author that you tried working with. You've been trying to do this for a number of years. I guess the first two publishers or writers didn't work out, but something about you and Dave Jordan clicked here.
Well, Dave is a great storyteller, and he does great research, and he was the ideal guy for the job that I needed.
How long, once you and Dave got together, how long did it take, start to finish, to complete this project?
About 2 years.
And the interesting part, the interesting part about that is that basically when we first met was the weekend after Johnny D'Acquisto and I appeared at the hall. I had gotten a phone call from a mutual acquaintance who basically said, Parker's trying to get a project off the ground. It's been stalling. Can you help him out? But we didn't immediately get into that. We got to know each other for the better part of 4 months, and it was a conversation every Sunday about the NFL, about football. And if you'll ask Dave, he still to this day considers himself a football player who just happens to be really, really good at baseball. So, it really got to that point. And probably early 2018 is when we started working on the working together. It was after the Super Bowl. Dave just said, all right, let's write an article and let's see how we work together on an article. And I remember reading your book, Bruce, the team that changed baseball, about the 71 Pirates. And in the wake of Clemente's passing, I've always been really curious about the politics of right field, that spring training 1973. Mm-hmm. And so I asked Dave about that, and Dave's like, I know all about that. So we did the piece, basically, and it was picked up by the Sporting News, and then Dave can tell you he received a lot of accolades. He said, all right, fine, let's do the book.
Right. Dave Jordan, in putting this together, I know you interviewed a ton of people from Dave's life.
Yep.
Were there any 2 or 3 names in particular among the many that you interviewed who really stood out in terms of giving you tremendous memories, great detail, any real standouts among the many?
Oh Lord, I had spoken. The Pirates, I have to say, were extremely helpful in basically opening the 1979 Pirates Rolodex to me, where I spoke to nearly every player from the ball club. In addition, a number of players from Pirates history, everybody from Bob Veal to Doe Boyland, who was only on the team for a couple of seasons. And really, I spoke to close to 75, players, coaches, teachers from his high school life and his high school teammates, and a number of folks stood out. And I will tell you, one who did stand out was his high school teammate Bill Flowers, who was ultimately drafted the same year that Parker was in the 1970 draft. He picked 26th overall by the Cleveland Indians, and there's an interesting part of the book which makes Bill Flowers so relevant. We ended up spending the first 3 chapters just on Dave's high school life because it was so important in forming who he became, and Bill Flowers was a big part of that. And as you really see the book, you'll see how relevant he truly does become to Dave once Dave reaches the Pittsburgh Pirates major league roster.
So, Dave, you gave Mr. Jordan this long list of names of people you knew and said, these are the guys, go get them. Is that what you did?
Yeah, basically that was it. And the guys that I gave him were guys that was very instrumental in my development in my life. So he had a good list to work with.
Bill Flowers is a major character in the book, and he's not a household name. He didn't make the major leagues, but he was a highly touted player, drafted high by the Cleveland Indians, and then he came to the Pirates in a minor trade years and years ago. He was a left-hand hitter with speed, and I guess had some power too. A lot of people thought he was a can't-miss prospect, but for a number of reasons didn't make it. You still keep in touch with him pretty regularly?
Yeah, Bill has been participating in my golf tournament. So I get to see him at least once a year. And he's done got the golf bug done bit him. He wants to play all the time.
Yeah. Now, you saw him play. How good was he in his prime?
He was outstanding. He had above average speed, had a above average throwing arm, hit for average, probably was about a 15 to 20 home run man a year. But he was a complete player.
Yeah. Let's talk about your first spring training. You were drafted by the Pirates in 1970, but your first spring training is not until 1971 in this beautiful place, Bradenton, Florida. I've been to many minor league ballparks in the state of Florida. McKechnie Field, although it's not known by that name anymore, it's now a corporate name, but for years it was McKechnie Field. It's my favorite spring training stadium. I love it. It's a great complex. Tell us your initial impressions, Dave, when you first arrived there in 1971.
Well, it was all big leagues. Coming to McKechnie was a thrill, to see 500 guys get on Pirate City and run around the stadium and then out the outskirts of the outer fence. That was something that was a thrill to me, and it was a challenge because right away you look at all these guys from all over the country, and they're all competing for the same thing that you are. So it turns into a challenge immediately.
The Pirates had a lot of talent, not only at the major league level at that time, they would go on to win the World Series, but they also had a number of top prospects throughout their system. Was it a bit intimidating for a young player like you? Sure, it's a first-class organization. It's a great spring training facility. But with all this talent, were you saying, boy, this is going to be tough to break through?
And that was the first impression I got when I saw the guys from California and all over the country at spring training. But that only lasted for about a week. And right away, it turned into business. So I immediately got on my job, got to concentrating on, am I going to catch or am I going to play the outfield?
Dave Jordan, I understand that Dave really urged you to go to Bradenton, to go to Pirate City a few years ago. He wanted you to get the lay of the land, not only of the facility, the ballpark, but the town itself. Tell us about that trip and what you learned about Bradenton.
Oh, wow. I spent some time at the facility, the complex, and Pirate City was built in the late 1960s, and it really resembled a baseball facility alongside a really nice 3-star Holiday Inn. The players would stay on the campus, and they played together, and they ate together, and they slept in the same rooms. Unless, at least the single players, if you were married, you stayed off campus. But for the most part, it was just all the young prospects and a few of the rostered veterans staying together, living together, having 3 squares a day together, and then going out in the town, running around Bradenton together. And this is, from what I understand, what Dave told me, this is where the concept of the family truly began. It wasn't just something that started in June of 1979. It started with Pirate City.
Dave Parker, I'm curious about that first spring training. How much did you learn, not only in terms of the fundamentals of the game, but also the way you should carry yourself? You had some good role models, people to draw from. How much did you learn during that first camp in Bradenton?
Well, I learned a lot, and you'll be surprised when you hear this name. I learned most of it from Doc Ellis.
Really?
Doc Ellis was a colorful guy, had a great relationship with the younger players, would take us to dinner sometime in his new car. And Doc was a guy that showed you what you needed to do to be a big leaguer. And Stardew was probably more in tune with working with younger players. And Willie was very instrumental to me and most of the guys that was in my age group.
Yeah. We're going to talk about both those guys in some depth a bit later on. But I also want to talk about this gentleman because you got to meet him toward the end of his life, as it turned out, spring of 71, spring training of 72. You then made your major league debut in 73 after his passing. What was it like meeting the great one, Roberto Clemente, for the first time? Was it intimidating, enthralling, or a little bit of both?
Well, I was in awe because he was the great one. That's what people told me about him and what I saw of him on TV. He could do everything. And he was instrumental in me learning how to be an outfielder because I signed as a catcher and I used to short arm the ball. So I wasn't getting full velocity and distance from my throws. And then he was working with me one day and he said, well, if you want more, you got to reach back. And he showed me how to reach back. And I reached back and got about 10 more miles an hour and about 20 more yards of distance. And that was the first introduction to meeting the great one. He was instrumental to my career.
So even though he was this veteran player and he had a reputation for being kind of quiet, at least publicly, but it sounds like he really talked to you. He kind of took you under his wing is what it sounds like to me.
Yeah, he did. And without him, I probably wouldn't have developed the arm that I had, because I had a decent arm, but when he showed me that, it turned my arm into a great arm. And just being around him, I looked at him in awe, because he ran the bases intelligently and hard, had an arm that he could throw from one wall to home plate. He was the man.
Dave, I get this question all the time. What's the greatest right field throwing arm I've ever seen? And of course, the two names that come immediately to mind are yours and Roberto Clemente. It's hard to separate the two. Did you guys ever joke around about who had the better arm of the two?
He wouldn't joke. He'd just go in the corner, make a play, and show me how good his arm was.
Yeah.
I mean, he'd make a play in the right field corner and throw a guy out at third. So if we played the same day, he'd get an opportunity to show his off, and I'd show mine off the first opportunity I got.
So, but you never joked with him and said, Roberto, my arm's a little better than yours. You never said that to him.
No, I never did. He was a great one.
Yeah. This is a question for Dave Jordan. I don't know if you've ever seen the throw that Clemente made. It was in the 71 World Series. I want to say it was either Game 5 or Game 6. It was a ball in the corner that he dug out. And he threw the ball literally from the warning track to Manny Sanguillen on one hop. I believe Mark Belanger was the runner at third, and he just stopped dead in his tracks. He said, I can't do this. I've never seen a guy throw the ball from the warning track to home plate on one short hop. You ever see that play?
I've seen it in passing. It's not something that comes right to my mind, but it just is emblematic of his ability and his intelligence and just how fundamentally sound he was. He wasn't just this talented athlete who could get by on pure gifts. He was smart and he was insightful with his play, and he knew all the fundamentals, and the fundamentals he gifted, to Dave, and really helped, spur Dave to become one of the great outfielders of the 70s.
Yeah. Willie Stargell told me that Clemente used to go through a.
But I'll tell you one thing. There was an amazing story that Dave. What's up?
No, go right ahead.
Oh, okay. No, Dave told me a story that we included in the book, actually about another icon from 1971, and Dave can explore this one as well. Is that it was spring training, and Dave was just hitting line drive after line drive against the fence in right and center field, and you could hear the chain link bouncing from the dugout. And then once Dave sat back down after taking his swings, this 70-year-old man tapped Dave on the shoulder. And what did he say, Dave?
He said, I hit the ball harder than anybody ever seen.
I mean, he was basically, he was saying, and who is that guy?
He was a great power trainer.
Wow.
And I didn't know who he was, and
Yeah.
people were making me aware of who he was. And I just got a compliment from one of the greatest of all time.
Yeah.
Power trainer.
Now that's a great generation connector there. Pie trainer to Dave Parker. I mean, that's incredible. The one thing I was going to mention, Dave Jordan, about Clemente, Willie Stargell told me years ago that Clemente used to do this pregame drill. He would set up a garbage can, like a plastic or a rubberized garbage can right near third base. He would throw the ball from right field, and he would try to land each throw into the garbage can. And he wouldn't get everyone in, but he had a pretty good percentage. He was able to accurately land many of those throws. I mean, and the point that he was trying to make was this was something he worked on. He worked on not only the arm strength, but the accuracy of the arm.
Mhm.
And it sounds like he passed that along to you, Dave, in those early spring trainings.
Yeah, well, he taught me that. He taught me. I was very accurate too. I had 26 assists one year and 21 assists. And it was all because of working with him. I took advantage of the time I had with him, picked up some pointers. But Roberto, I try to match up our abilities and the things that we did. And we talked about speed. People would compare speed between me and Roberto, throwing, arm strength, accuracy. They just kind of pieced us together and never came to a comparison.
Yeah.
Because he's the great one.
Yeah. Of course, we lost him one of the worst nights in baseball history, New Year's Eve, 1972. Clemente, 5 other men aboard a DC-7 flight to Nicaragua, killed in a plane crash. Clemente only 38. He had already said he was going to come back and play at least one more season for the Pirates. So that creates this very difficult situation going into 1973. Pirates have a young catcher named Milt May. They decide after he has a great spring training, he's going to be the #1 catcher. Manny Sanguillen, their established catcher, moves to the outfield. And Manny, who was best friends with Roberto, is really caught in just an impossible predicament, trying to play a new position and trying to replace his best friend on the team. Now, you were not with the team at the beginning of the season, but you did come up to the Pirates later on. I imagine you must have had a sense of how difficult this was for Manny.
Manny, did you say how difficult it was for Manny?
Yeah, replacing Clemente at the start of the 73 season. How difficult that was.
Yeah, from Manny Sanguillen.
It was difficult because right field is probably the toughest outfield position to play. And you just don't go out and play right field. You know, you got to train and get used to the flight of the ball from right-hand hitters and left-hand hitters, learn how to cut off the ball in the corners. So it was a task just to learn how to play right field. And then to try to follow a guy like Roberto, I mean, he had some big shoes to fill.
Later in the season, you come up from AAA and you appear in 19 games in right field in 1973. Were you still feeling that pressure, the shadow of Clemente, even though it was a little bit later in the season?
No, I wasn't. I wanted to establish myself as Dave Parker. And you don't follow Clemente. I mean, he was the great one. And I'm going to use that word a lot because he was. You know, it was virtually impossible to fill his shoes. So Manny was in a tough situation.
Let's talk about your first manager, Bill Verdon, longtime official with the Pirates. I think he still might go to spring training. I know he was going there a few years ago. Very knowledgeable, very educated guy, kind of quiet, pretty stern from what I understand. How was he to play for?
He was easy to play for. I mean, he put you in position as long as you hustle. He demand that you hustle. You see guys today that hit ground balls and jog to first base. You don't do that with Bill. Bill was a guy that demanded that you put forth an effort to play for him. And he was a man of his word. I respected it.
Now, he had been a very good outfielder in his playing days back in the 1950s. Did he work with you at all on the outfield?
Yeah, he used to work me with that fungo.
Mm-hmm.
He killed me with that fungo.
Yeah.
He hit the ball right to left, over your head. And when you done worked out, Bill done worked you out, you know it.
Let's go back to a guy that you mentioned earlier. I've been lucky enough to interview a lot of the great Pirates from the early 70s. One of my big regrets, I never had a chance to meet this man, never had a chance to talk to him. Some other people here at the Hall of Fame did run into him just a few years before he passed away. They met him just by happenstance at, I think it was the University of Pittsburgh, in the library there. And they said he couldn't have been nicer. You know, Doc had this persona. You mentioned, you know, he's this colorful personality. He may have been the most colorful guy you ever played with. He did crazy things like, you know, hit 5 Cincinnati Reds in a row at the start of a game. We have the hair curler incident at Wrigley Field. But that really was just one side, one of many sides. Doc Ellis was a lot more complicated than that, right?
Yeah, Doc used to do stuff to keep people from realizing how smart he was, because he was a very bright guy. And he was sent a lot of that curlers and craziness to keep people from getting close to him and really knowing how intelligent that he was.
I heard once, I don't know if you were there at the time, but I heard that Muhammad Ali came into the Pirate Clubhouse one day, and Doc Ellis, I guess, did a pretty good impersonation of Muhammad Ali. And I think he might have done it in front of Ali. Were you there for that?
No.
You weren't. You missed that. Okay. Some of the other things, you know, that Doc did, he was very brash. During the 1971 playoffs, he openly complained about the accommodations in San Francisco during the National League Championship Series. He made a bit of a stir about that. But when he got on the mound, he was such a competitive guy, and a guy who often pitched in a lot of pain. He pitched through it. When Doc was on the mound, was he the kind of guy that just, did that breed confidence that you were going to win that day? Was his competitive nature so prevalent that it carried over to the other team, the other players on the team?
We knew we had a good chance when Doc was on the mound that we would win. Doc, with the Cincinnati situation, Cincinnati had knocked us out of the playoffs 2 years straight. And Doc got in the middle of the clubhouse and said, "You guys are scared of Cincinnati." He said, "I'm gonna show you that they just another team." And Doc said, "I'm hitting everybody come to the plate." And I said, "You ain't gonna do nothing." And he said, "I'm hitting everybody come to the plate." And I said, "Yeah, right." And we go out, take the field. Cincinnati's hitting first. And Morgan come to the plate. And Doc drills. No, it was Griffey. And Doc drilled Griffey. And Morgan comes up, Doc throws and misses. And Morgan gets back in the box, talking about, "Come on, Doc, let's play baseball." Doc nodded to him. He got in the box, Doc hit him too. And then Pete Rose got in the box, Doc hit him. And he threw 3 times at Bench's head and missed him. And he came in the dugout and said, "I can't believe I missed that big head guy." But Doc was a man of his word. And we beat Cincinnati the rest of the year.
Now, he sent a message. He set the tone. Fascinating what kind of a player you know, that he could be during his career. Let's talk a little bit more about Doc and what happened to him off the field. During much of his career, he had problems with drugs. He freely admitted that. Shortly after his playing days ended, he stopped using drugs. He went into rehabilitation. And really the last 25 years of his life, he was drug-free, and he spent a lot of time telling kids, "Don't repeat the mistakes that I made." I'm curious, Dave, if you had a chance to keep in touch with Doc and to get to know that second version of Doc and the way he kind of rehabilitated himself, changed things. Did you get to know that side of Doc as well?
Yeah, I knew Doc all the way up until the day he died. He begged me to stop drinking. And I told him I would. He says, "Because what I got, man," he says, "that nobody will want it." He was in some severe pain, and he was preaching the no drugs and the no drinking. He was clean. He was clean. He was drug free, but he had went so far into dealing with the drugs it destroyed his body because he was in severe pain.
Did he know that his time was short, or did he still think he had a chance to beat it?
No, he knew his time was short. And I used to talk to him about 3-4 times a week. And every time he would preach to not drink and to also get Larry DEMERY to follow his path.
As a friend of his, you must have taken pride in how this guy was able to completely redeem himself, completely turn his life around.
Yeah, but it was late.
Yeah.
It was late. I would like to see him do it earlier in his career and earlier in my time that I spent with him.
Yeah. One final note on Doc, a lighter note. You must have been there that day at Wrigley Field when he came out in the hair curlers. What'd you think of all that?
I've been as Doc Ellis. Doc had some young lady braid his hair. He was planning on doing it the day before, so he had everything in motion. So he came out with the curlers in his hair and got news, and that's what he was looking for.
Yeah. I wonder how the manager and coaches reacted.
They knew Doc. You know, Doc was a guy that had a mind of his own, and Berthold knew to expect Doc to do different things on the field, so they were prepared for him.
Yeah. Let's talk about another really important player and character on those Pirate teams, the great Willie Stargell. You must have met him for the first time, spring training, 1971. Do you remember your first conversation with him?
Yeah. He says, here's the guy they say gonna rewrite the record book. And that was his introduction to me. And from that day on, I stayed around him and ROBERTO. And Willie was the greatest.
But you know, the other interesting aspect of Stargell, from what Dave told me, was that basically he had a philosophy of don't ever get too high, and then to be even keeled on the ball field. Don't ever get too high. Don't ever get too low. And he tried to keep that even keeled sense among all the players on the ball club.
Dave Jordan, I'm curious. The book is very detailed. Lots of interviews. You said over 75 guys you talked to. Was it a little difficult in the sense that you couldn't interview Stargell, you couldn't interview Ellis, you couldn't interview Clemente simply because they had passed on so early? Was that a challenge overcoming that?
It was somewhat of a challenge, but when you speak with numerous people, and 5 or 6 or a dozen of them tell you basically the same story, and there are times when you'll get 12 different versions of a story, but you'll get 10 of the same details, and you'll get 10 of the exact same line and how something was spoken, and when there's 4 guys in a room and one guy gets sent down, and the other 3 guys in the room are Parker, Scoop Oliver, and the guy who was sent down, and they all say the same thing. Yeah. I mean, it allows you to kind of fill out the canvas, so to speak. So yeah, of course it's a challenge, but you still are able to paint that picture.
Dave Parker, what was it about Willie's personality that made him such a great leader?
He was a philosopher. I mean, Willie could sit down and talk to you about a subject and turn it into something beautiful. Willie was a guy that everybody liked. If you couldn't like Willie, you couldn't like anybody, because he had a personality that just was attracted people. And Willie was easy to talk to, and he was instrumental to the organization. He was a guy that front office members would listen to.
Was he the kind of guy that might come up to you? Let's say you have a bad game. You know, you strike out a couple times. You don't really do anything offensively. Maybe the team loses. You're feeling down. Is he the kind of guy that would sense that, come over and say something to you, encourage you?
He'll remind you that you're playing a profession that's played with a round object, traveling at 90 miles an hour. And if you was in any other profession, you would be fired. You know, he just emphasized the fact that, you know, you're going to make 7 outs in 10 at bats, and it's considered good. And he would tell people things related to that to make them see that, you know, don't get too down.
Was there anything about his left-handed swing that, I don't want to say you copied it, but maybe you borrowed from? He had a different style of hitting, obviously, than you. But was there anything about his approach to hitting that you were able to incorporate in your offensive attack?
Well, me and Willie, we hit behind each other. And we learned each other's habits and stance and approach to the ball. So we knew each other's batting stance and hitting approach better than Bob Skinner, who was our hitting instructor in '79. Me and Willie had a problem. We would come to each other. We wouldn't go to the hitting instructor. So that was something that me and Willie did together as a unit.
Well, players like Willie Stargell and Doc Ellis, obviously household names, very important to you. Here's a guy not a household name, but reading the book, it's obvious that he's a major player in your life, a longtime friend. Pitcher named Larry Demery, who pitched for the Pirates in the 1970s. Tell us about how important he has been as a friend to you, as a teammate for a little while, because this is a guy that's not real well known.
Well, Larry was called Sapo. He had these big eyes. And Sapo in Spanish is frog. And he was young, had a fastball about 96, 97, and was trying to establish himself in the big leagues. I think he took on imitating Doc Ellis a little too soon, and he ended up hurting his arm. And that cost him.
You still keep in touch with Larry today? What is he retired? Is he still working? What does he do?
Well, he had a painting company where he paint houses and interior of houses. So that's what he was doing the last time I talked to him.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. I sometimes hear former players when they're broadcasting and, you know, they talk about hitters hang out with hitters, pitchers hang out with pitchers. It doesn't seem to be the case with you. You liked a lot of the pitchers. Demery, Ellis, didn't really matter what position they played.
No, I didn't. I couldn't make a living without him. I had to take care of him.
Yeah. Let's talk about the manager who came in and really brought things together in the late 70s. I had the pleasure of meeting Chuck many years ago, and he was a lot of fun to talk to. Day to day in the clubhouse, in the dugout, was he as positive and as outgoing as he's always been made out to be?
Yes. I mean, Chuck was the world's biggest optimist. We could be down 7-1 in the 9th inning, and Chuck could tell us we got him just where we want him. And we won a lot of those games because he was just one of those guys that never quit. And he had a theory about managing that he told me, and I took it into my business when I owned Popeyes. And that was that you govern with one eye and one ear. And that's the way he ran that team.
What do you mean by that? Governed with one eye and one ear?
You didn't see everything. You didn't hear everything. So he let the guys kind of govern themselves,
Oh,
and he stepped in when it was necessary.
was he a guy who ever got mad? I never saw him get mad. If he did, it escaped me. Always seemed to be so positive, but were there times when the temper came through?
Yeah, Tim Foley. I remember him picking Tim Foley up by the collar and slamming him up against the wall. And Chuck had a grip like a bear. And that was the only time I seen him really upset. And Foley ended up apologizing, and everything went back to square one.
Yeah. It's interesting because Tim had a reputation early in his career for having a temper. He was nicknamed Crazy Horse for a while. And it sounds like he met his match in Chuck Tanner.
Yeah, Chuck straightened him out in a hurry. I didn't like Tim Foley when I first met him because he played a little dirty. He dropped a knee on people going head first and the second. And I really didn't like him. But once I started playing with him, I mean, this guy was so fundamentally sound and laying down bunts, hitting behind the runner. And you could see how instrumental this guy could be to somebody's team. And I changed that attitude in a hurry. I really started to like him because he was executing.
That's interesting. Let's talk, Dave, about some of the aspects of your career. Compiled some interesting photographs of the various face masks and headgear, Parker's protection, as we called him here. I'm curious about some of these contraptions. Were these your ideas? Did somebody else come up with these? Did someone construct these for you? I don't think I've ever seen such an array of protective batting gear.
Well, I put together the first one. I actually put together both sets. I wanted to make this one special, so I made it black and gold, just like our uniforms. And Jason was a horror flick that was on TV, and I got that kind of feedback from it. But the one that I wore was Bradshaw's face mask, hooked on a baseball helmet. And that was the one that I used.
Did Tony Barterome, the trainer, put that together for you?
Yeah, Tony screwed him in. We needed something that he could do, so we let him work on the helmet.
Yeah. Going back to the one on the left, which is a hockey mask, and it is reminiscent of Jason from Friday the 13th. I'm amazed you could see out of that thing and hit a baseball.
I kind of revealed it too quick because I went to batting practice and San Diego was in town. And I was taking batting practice with hitting balls in the second deck and hitting balls out of the park. And it came a time where Chuck called me to pinch hit, and they intentionally walked me because they knew I could see through that helmet.
Why do you think you got hit so often? Was it pitchers just trying to challenge you inside? Was it something about your batting stance? Why do you think that became a bit of a concern during your career?
Well, I only got hit 50 times in 19 years, so they didn't throw at me too much. But I made sure I had good plate coverage, and that meant getting a little closer to the plate. And I might have got hit 50 times. I think I saw a stat on it.
Yeah. Well, that's a pretty high total. I mean, it's not Don Baylor or Ron Hunt territory, but that's still a lot over the course of a career. One of the real highlights of your career, well, several. 1978, you win the MVP. And then, of course, 1979, you not only go to the World Series with the Pirates, but you also play in the All-Star game. Before I get to the series, I want to talk a little bit about that All-Star game. I rewatched some of the highlights. You had an infield single, you had a sacrifice fly, and then you came up with those remarkable throws. One of them was on a ball that you just couldn't see against that King Dome ceiling. That must have been a nightmare trying to play in that ballpark.
Yeah, it was tough. We had Morgan at second base, and Pete Rose was playing first. And I looked up at the ceiling, and it was decorated in red, white, and blue, and I couldn't find the ball. And me, Joe, and Pete standing there with our arms open, like, where's the ball? And the ball landed about 20 yards away from me. And I ran back, and I figured that Jim Rice, if he was taking advantage of what was taking place, that he should be around third base. And I got the ball on one bounce and turned and threw one hopper to Ron Shea at third to get Rice out at third base.
And he was out by a considerable margin. It was not even close. Then there's the play, the Greg Nettles line drive that you have to play on a kind of a tough hop. It was a high hop.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you're a shorter man, that ball might have gotten over your head, but you even had to stretch out. And then you make that remarkable throw to Gary Carter. A lot of people say that's your best throw. Do you agree, or was there another throw better?
Well, there was a few throws better. I remember Chris Spire in San Francisco. He was at third base, and the ball was hit to the warning track, and I caught it on the warning track, and he was taking this little leisurely jog home, and I threw a ball that got him out at home plate. He just stood at home plate and looked at it out of right field because he had no idea that the ball would be there.
Later in '79, your World Series, and it's really overshadowed by Willie Stargell. Stargell had 400, and he won the series MVP, but you had an outstanding series. You batted .345. You had an OPS of .845. You had 4 RBIs, played your usual terrific right field. You look back, you had to face an all-world pitching staff, Flanagan, McGregor, Jim Palmer, Steve Stone. How'd you do it? You're facing guys you never saw before. Was it just you were on a hot streak at the right time? Was there a scouting report that helped you? What do you think contributed to this amazing performance in the series?
I love to compete. That's my time of year. I just was competing, and the bigger the name, the more I competed. Jim Rice, competing against him, that was a thrill. Palmer, McGregor, all those guys were 20-game winners. And I like dealing and competing against those guys. Those are the ones that bring the cream to the top.
Yeah. Which of the 4 was the toughest on you? Flanagan, McGregor, Palmer, or Stone?
McGregor was tough. He was the toughest. He had this little fastball that he ran in on my hands, and I had to muscle him. I got my hits off of him, but I had to muscle the ball because he wouldn't let me extend my arm. But he was the toughest out of Flanagan. He was pretty tough, but he was very hittable. He made a lot of mistakes in the middle of the plate. And Palmer, all he did was work his fastball up around the letters. So I enjoyed competing against him.
Dave Jordan, I want to talk about your approach in this book. We've talked about some of Dave's many accomplishments, but I know both of you wanted to also, deal with the more difficult side of things, the drug problems, the drug trials. As an author, how do you approach something like that? It's not pleasant to talk about, but obviously you both felt it was an important part of the story.
Well, again, coming off a fastball, John, and that was an interesting story of baseball in the 70s and 80s and the 90s that Johnny D had taken a couple of tough turns later in his life. And so on the back of that book, I sat down with Dave and said, basically, look, the last book I did was one of the most honestly written baseball memoirs ever published. And Dave basically said, I'm right here. Dave wanted to tell his story. That's how you get a book like that done. There are some folks who come into it saying, I want to write a book, but then you tell them, this is what people want to hear. And I also conducted an anecdotal survey of 100 of the most fervent baseball book readers. And I asked them, what do you want to hear? And once they told me and conveyed what they wanted to hear about, what they want to learn, I told Dave, this is what everybody's saying they want to talk about, they want to read about. And Dave said, well, I want to tell them. So that made things so much easier.
Yeah. Dave Parker, if I have the timeline right, you first kind of became introduced to drugs in, I think it was 76. And then you ended up stopping in 82. The first few years didn't seem to have much effect on your career. You're spectacular player, 77, 78, still outstanding in 79. And then 1980, things start declining a little bit. Do you think it was the drug use mostly? Do you think that was the major factor, or were there other factors just as important?
Well, there was other factors. I was hurt. I had 2 knee surgeries. I had ligament damage in my wrist, but I was basically just hurt. You know, and that was shown when I went to Cincinnati and got healthy, and everything was back to normal. But you just can't do the job at the top level and be hurt. And I think that was shown when I went to Cincinnati for 4 years and had all-star years.
Let me jump in for a second. Basically, what made this such a compelling story was that in 1970, 1969, 1970, Dave underwent a couple of knee surgeries as a senior high school athlete. And the doctors basically told him, your football career is done, but you can play baseball. But there will be a time where you're going to have to address these knee issues again. And, within 7-8 years, the knee injuries began to resurface, and Dave kept dealing with it. Like, he'd wake up every morning having an issue with his knees, and he'd have to tape the knees, ice the knees. And in the back of his mind, he's like, I have to deal with this. Is this going to get a lot worse? There was a little bit of injury level anxiety to go along with that, and he still performed on field, but he knew in the back of his head he was going to have to address these injuries, and they did come back to haunt him in 80 to 82.
Yeah. Just going back to the drug issue for one more question. Do you have any message, Dave, for kids today who might be talented athletes, but they are struggling with drug abuse? What should they do? Who should they talk to? What's the first step they need to take, in your opinion?
They should go see somebody like a trainer, a doctor, a parent, a friend, just somebody that they can confide in. Drugs is very prominent out in the general public. Everybody was doing it when I got introduced to it in the mid-70s. Everybody was doing cocaine. I mean, it was a part of going out everywhere you went.
Yeah.
The medical profession, teachers, entertainers. I mean, it was a part of everyday life.
Let's talk a little bit about what happened after the 1983 season. You become a free agent. I was growing up in New York. I was about to enter college, avid Yankee fan. I kept hearing these rumors. Dave Parker is going to sign with the New York Yankees. And I was thrilled. I thought, he's going to bounce back. Playing at Yankee Stadium, he's primed for a comeback. I thought it was going to happen. Did you ever come close to signing with the Yankees? Or was that just
Tom Rich and Steinbrenner was talking to each other back and forth, and it almost got done. but it fell short at the last minute. So I missed playing in Yankee Stadium, which that right field fence was awful inviting.
Yeah, I think you would have enjoyed that. That would have been fun. Instead, you end up going to the Cincinnati Reds, and that works out very well. There you join an up-and-coming team, and you really become a mentor to several young players, Eric Davis, Cal Daniels, Paul O'Neill, and a future Hall of Famer, Barry Larkin. Tell us about your role as a father figure on those teams.
Well, they kept me young. I mean, I was reaching the mid-30s, mid to late 30s, and I inherited all these young players. And the thing about them, they were great students. They listened well and learned. Wasn't no hard-headed guys. And I worked with them and turned them into some decent ball players. Barry Larkin, Hall of Famer. Eric Davis was a big-time star in the American League. Cal Daniels, Paul O'Neill ended up being a big-time Yankee. So they kept me young, and in return, I revealed some of my secrets about baseball.
When Barry Larkin entered the Hall of Fame a few years back, he included you on his invite list, and he made sure, from what I understand, that you were seated in the front row at the Clark Sports Center for that ceremony. So it's obvious that that relationship is still a strong one all these years later.
Yes, it is. He's announcing now for the Reds, so I get a chance to see him. He lives in Florida, so I get a chance to see him. And I go down, maybe I attend 12 games a year.
Nice. We have a few minutes left with Dave Parker and Dave Jordan, authors of Cobra, A Life of Baseball and Brotherhood. Let's get some questions from our audience in the chat room. The first one comes in from Martin Brody. Let's see. He says, did Dave ever think of playing football in college and in the NFL before his high school injury? So would the NFL have been your first choice if you were healthy?
If I was healthy, I would have chose football. I wanted to walk on to Ohio State, and then I got hurt my first game of my senior year. So that ended those dreams, and I chose baseball behind that.
Yeah. What was your position in football?
I was a running back.
Okay. Well, you certainly had this. Were you a fullback or a tailback? I bet a fullback at your size.
I was a tailback. I had good open field moves.
Nice. Question comes in from David, another Dave. Dave, you had one of the best throwing arms I've ever seen. I'm wondering, as a player, what felt better for you, hitting a home run or throwing out a base runner?
The home run, you just can't take that feeling away. I mean, it's a thing where you make that contact and it gives you a good feeling throughout your body. And throwing a guy out would be second to that.
Yeah. Question from Jason Schwartz. Thanks to both Daves for telling such an important and wonderful story. Curious if Dave Parker has a favorite player from the Negro Leagues. Of course, the Negro Leagues were in their heyday, you know, before your time. You may have met some of those Negro Leaguers, maybe a Satchel Paige along the way. Is that something you follow, the Negro Leagues? Have you developed a like for any of those Negro League greats?
I'm in the Negro League Hall of Fame.
Nice.
I went up to Kansas City, and they inducted me in that. So I'm big on Negro League. Josh Gibson was a guy that people talked about. This guy used to hit the ball so hard that players would dive out of the way of the ball. He is one that I pay a lot of attention to, what he did in his career and what he did in his history in baseball.
How about Oscar Charleston? I obviously never saw him play, and there's not really any film, But from what I've read, he was a similar player to you. Left-hand hitter with power and speed, and he played a good outfield. I would think Charleston would be a guy you might have some interest in too.
Well, I'll check him out.
All right. We'll do that. Let's see, we have any other questions? Yes, we'll take one final question here. It's from Steven. He wants to know, quite simply, who was the toughest pitcher you ever faced during your 19-year career?
Steve Carlton was tough on me. He would strike me out 3 times and then hang a slider, and I end up hitting a home run off of him. Steve was a guy that struck me out more than any player I'd ever faced. And I hit more home runs off of him than any player I ever faced. So it was feast or famine with him.
Final question for Dave Parker. You were diagnosed with Parkinson's back in 2012, so now 9 years ago. How are you feeling these days? How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Spending a lot of time with my grandchildren, and I'm right across the street from the Reds Youth Academy, so I have a chance to work with some kids in the neighborhood and high school. So I'm doing good.
You have a foundation that's raising money in the fight against Parkinson's. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
It's called the 39 Foundation, and I've been doing a golf tournament and some speaking engagements to raise money for the Parkinson.
Very good. We'll look that up, the 39 Foundation, and I guess people can go to the website and make donations?
Yeah.
Yes, they can.
Very good. Very good. Dave Jordan, final question for you. I know you guys have been busy promoting the book, actually doing some in-person appearances, signing. Imagine that. We're getting back to the regular world. What's coming up next for you guys in terms of promotion for this wonderful book?
Well, we have a number of podcasts and that we'll be doing this weekend, or at least I'll be doing. We'll be doing something tomorrow evening together. And we're going back and forth, and hopefully we'll have something on the calendar in the late spring, early summer to be visiting the Pittsburgh Pirates at PNC. So we're looking forward to that.
Well, that's terrific. We wish both of you the best of luck. It's always good to talk to Dave Jordan. Dave Parker, it's been an honor to have you on for the last hour. A great, fascinating career and a terrific book. Congratulations on the book, and I hope it does real well for both of you.
Thank you. That's very nice.
Well, we thank Dave Parker, Dave Jordan for joining us on our virtual author series. If you'd like to get a copy of the book, we urge you to do so. It's worth it, every penny. Go to Amazon.com or nebraskapress.unl.edu, or you can go to barnesandnoble.com. We thank Dave Parker and Dave Jordan for joining us for the virtual author series. And of course, we thank our sponsor, the Ford Motor Company. Thanks for being with us, everybody. Have a great day. Take care.